of Environment and Natural Resource Committee, the Honorable Sophia Abdi Noor, to second. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Ijara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this chance to second this motion. Mr. Speaker, and as a committee, the joint committee, we were very sensitive and very alive to the fact that Kenya meets the United Nations forest cover. So being alert and alive to the fact that we are doing a thorough campaign as a Committee of Environment and Natural Resources with our sister committee, Committee of Lands. We felt that we went into thorough discussions and we went through various stages before we reached the decisions that we are asking this House to adopt and approve. Mr. Speaker, considering the petition, the Joint Committee had various meetings. We had a meeting with the Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Lands and Fiscal Planning, and we deliberated on the issue in depth with the Minister and experts from the team, from the Ministry. We also had a meeting with the Chief Administrative Secretary of Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And we talked, and we were very open, in particular discussing on the forest cover of this country, so that we as a country, we need to meet the demands and the standards of forest cover. So we were able to engage and interact properly with the Chief Administrative Secretary, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Joint Committee also undertook a field trip to Bungoma County. We had 2 days meeting in Bungoma County where we met with several stakeholders. We met with the Ondiek and the Dorobo community elders, Council of Elders. These are the gatherers and hunters who live in those forests, Mr. Speaker. And we met with them so that we could understand what they think of the proposals that we were fronting as joint committee, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we also met with various groups. We also received submission from various stakeholders following an advertisement that we placed in the Daily Nations on the 26th of July 2018 in line with Article 118 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this report is to respond to the prayer made by the executive, Mr. Speaker. In the said petition, the Joint Committee having considered all the views collected, Mr. Speaker, they observed that the approval of a legal notice to effect the violation of the boundaries of Mount Elgon Forest Reserve, Mr. Speaker, first on a resolution of Parliament upon recommendation by the Kenya Forest Service Board, pursuant to Section 34 of the Forest Conservation and Management Act 2018. Mr. Speaker, we were able to discuss with them, and the recommendation by Kenya Forest Board should be guided by the following. These are the guiding points when they are considering on the violation of the boundary of Mount Elgon Forest Reserve, Mr. Speaker. One of the guiding points were the intent of violation must be approved by the Forest Conservation Committee of the area, Mr. Speaker. Every area where there is forest, Mr. Speaker, they have the Forest Conservation Committee of the area, except my area, Mr. Speaker, which is Ijara, the Boni Forest. We do not have the Conservation Committee. But elsewhere, there are forest committees, and these committees are consulted, they discuss with the committee, and those they give the approval at that stage, Mr. Speaker. The other very important thing that is supposed to be looked into before you approve is the species which are very rare that are found in some particular forest, Mr. Speaker, and those must be looked into properly so that they are not endangered. If we say we want to have this forest carved so that we can resettle people and we have some species which are endangered species, then that will not be approved. So we looked at that too, so that we could not violate some of the issues. The other issues which was very critical and very important, and whenever we are talking about forest, and particularly when we are addressing issues of Mau Forest, we talk about the water catchment areas, Mr. Speaker. And when we went to Mount Elgon, we also had a discussion with the committee, and the committee was supposed to look at the value of the forest for water catchment that should not be affected in any way, Mr. Speaker, so that the springs that are in the forest, the lakes that are in the forest, should not be affected in any way in terms of resettling people along the path of the streams, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the other very important thing was that the committee is expected to carry an independent environmental impact assessment so that they ascertain the importance of, whether it is valued, the points we are raising, so that we are very clear in our mind that what we are doing is the right thing, and we are bringing to this house a very crucial and a very important decision that has gone through various stages, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the other important aspect of this was public participation. And I have already told you clearly when I started that we had met with several interest groups, the Ondieki among them, the Dorobos Council of Elders, Mr. Speaker. Those are very important stakeholders. We met with them. We met with several other stakeholders, and we had a public participation in Mount Elgon Forest, Mr. Speaker, the Joint Committee. Mr. Speaker, further, the Joint Committee noted that all the submissions that we got after we brought all together and we met, we found out that all the submission supported the degazettement, Mr. Speaker. It is supported the degazetment. Mr. Speaker, it is only Kitale that disagreed. But all the other submissions were in agreement with the gazettement. And Kitale, their fear was that people will be resettled in Kitale. It is not that they were refusing the gazettement, but they were fearing that the people who are for resettlement, it will go to their side. So that was only the content they had. But they were not refusing the major substance and the principle of the gazettement of the forest, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Joint Committee further noted that the government have facilitated the whole process of the gazettement, Mr. Speaker. They did what was required from them, Mr. Speaker, by law. Mr. Speaker, there was a proper, again, when we went out, we found out there was proper public participation. There was also approval of the Kenya Forest Services, and they also conducted the independent environmental impact assessment, Mr. Speaker, for the gazettement. That is the part of the government. They did all the process that was required under the law, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we further observed that the petition disclosed adequate grounds for violation of the boundary of Mount Elgon Forest Reserve by 4,607 hectares, Mr. Speaker. Given the security challenges that are associated with the area, Mr. Speaker, we felt that that was adequate enough to give the government what they required from us. Mr. Speaker, with those remarks, I second the motion for adoption and approval by this House, approving the violation of the boundaries of Mount Elgon Forest Reserve, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much.
Honorable members, allow me to propose the question that this House adopt report of the departmental committees on environment and natural resources and lands on their consideration of a petition by the executive regarding the variation of the boundaries of Mount Elgon Forest Reserve, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, July 4th, 2019, and pursuant to the provisions of Section 34, subsection 5B of the Forest Conservation and Management Act 2016, and noting the finding of the committees that the petition discloses grounds for variation of boundaries of the particular forest, this House, Roman 1, approves the variation of the boundaries of Mount Elgon Forest Reserve to exclude Chepuk Phases 2 and 3, comprising of a total area of 4,607 hectares. And Roman 2 resolves that the government secures the remaining forest area within Mount Elgon Forest Reserve, particularly in Chepkitale area, in line with the need to achieve the United Nations recommended 10% forest cover in the country.